So welcome to project planning and reporting for new grantees. I know some of you are experienced grantees, but you're at least new this year. You have a new award this year. And just a little reminder, we should have on with us today our ACE grantees, our Knowledge D grantees, and our STEP grantees who are all new. You may also have other grants that you have that we're continuing this year. If so, I'll give a little reminder at the end, but we do have a separate webinar for those who have continuing grants. But this particular session is going to be focused for those who have a new grant award this year. So let's go ahead and get ourselves disclaimed. This presentation was produced under U.S. Department of Education contract number GS00F115CA with Synergy Enterprises, Inc. The views expressed herein do not necessarily represent the positions or policies of the U.S. Department of Education. No official endorsement by the U.S. Department of Education of any product, commodity, service, or enterprise mentioned herein is intended or should be inferred. Great. Well, I think I've met most of you at this point, but I'm Sarah Brightwell. I'm the OIE Technical Assistance Team Lead, and I'll be walking you through our webinar today. As we go through, if you have any questions, please pop those in the chat box and we will try to get to them as we go through, as well as have a little time at the end specifically for questions. If you're having any trouble finding that chat box, remember it should be typically at the bottom of your screen with a little talk bubble. So during our time together today, we're going to discuss the meaning and importance of intentional program design, as well as SMART goals and objectives. We'll explore how you can go through some steps to actually create your own SMART goals and objectives. We'll touch upon your Gepra measures, those government performance and act measures that you are reporting on each and every year, as well as some general reporting requirements as we head into your spring reporting season. And then finally, we'll explore a project planner that is available for your use, and we'll look through each of its components and the different ways that it can be used in your program. So as we get started today, I want to touch a little upon intentional program design. So when starting a new project, we want everyone to be on the same page in order to create a culture of support for the project. When you were originally designing your program, you probably started by sharing a vision and mapping out the identified needs of your community. From there, you began to develop specific goals and objectives that included tangible, measurable outcomes. Some of those might have been SMART, while others might have been missing one or more components. And we'll get a little bit more into what those are. But in general, you wanted to create a timeline for your program. So as we look here at this intentional design model, you'll see that needs assessment process that I know most of you went through when you were designing your project, looking at data around your community, your school, your students, and then beginning to link those to the specific skills, whether they be academic, cultural, language skills, whatever you were trying to address, looking at best practices, maybe evidence-based practices, and how to get your students engaged. Now we move into the fun part. You've been awarded and you're moving into actually implementing your program. Some of you are still doing some planning and you'll continue doing planning throughout your entire project, but actually getting to start providing those services that you worked so hard to create. And then today we're really going to also kind of focus our look on outcomes, how we can take the outcomes of your program and really highlight them in your reporting. So taking it from that planning piece all the way through to being able to report out. So we talked just a minute ago, I brought up the word SMART. So I'm curious how many of you are familiar with SMART goals or SMART objectives, whatever kind of terminology you might have heard in regards to that. I'd like to try using our voting buttons. So if you are looking at your screen, you should see down at the bottom a little option for reactions. If you go there, you should be able to do a little voting. either with a thumbs up or a thumbs down or a yes, no. If you don't see it there, you might be able to find it in your participant window. There we go. I see some folks finding it there. So on participants, it's the one with the little people. And down at the bottom of the list, you can see those thumbs up, thumbs down, yes, no. So it looks like we have a few people familiar with SMART and then a few people who haven't. So that's fine. We're going to talk a little bit more about what that is and what that means today, and why it would be beneficial for you to use SMART goals and objectives. So in general, SMART goals and SMART objectives can really help us provide the big picture for our program and kind of highlight those pieces and parts. It can help create a common purpose for your entire program team, help us focus in on exactly what we want to provide to our students and exactly what type of impact we want to make on our students, and then also help with monitoring or completing tasks. And finally, it really clearly defines expectations. You know exactly what you're going to be doing, how it's going to be measured, and how that's going to work. So let's start from the top. We talked about at the beginning that a lot of times when you start your program, you're creating your vision and mission. So when we think about your vision and mission, some of us may already have one, some of us may not. So we're going to try out those voting buttons again. And I see a couple of folks who had trouble finding it. If you look at the bottom of your screen, I think for a lot of us, it's going to be under participants. So if you see the two little people outlines and it says participants under it, if you click that, it brings up a whole list of everybody who's on the webinar today. And then down at the bottom, it gives you some options to be able to do some voting. If you don't see it straight away, you may need to look under more. Sometimes some of your options are there under more. And if you'll just vote yes or no, do you have a vision and or mission? You may have one and not the other, that's fine. Or no. I'll give you a second to get your vote in. It looks like more of us are finding where the buttons are located. Perfect. All right. Okay, it looks like maybe about a third of us have that, about a third of us not, and about a third of us maybe haven't found the buttons just yet. Perfect. So typically when we think about our vision and mission, it might be for our entire organization. So it might be your school. It might be for your whole organization. Or it may be that you set a vision and mission specifically for your grant program. There's not a right or wrong, both are okay. If you have not had a vision or mission, again, whether it be for your organization or for your program, that might be something that would be worth taking a little time to sit down with your project team and really work through. As we think about that, I put a couple of examples up of a vision and a mission. Typically, a vision statement is going to be pretty broad. I like to say, when you're thinking of this, sit for a minute, close your eyes, and imagine what you would want your program to accomplish if there were absolutely no barriers. And I know there are certain days that that's easier to imagine than others, but just try to picture if there were no barriers, no hurdles, what would you want to accomplish through your program? And that big picture idea is your vision. The other thing about your vision is that typically that's going to be your long-term goal. You're not normally going to set a vision that you plan to achieve in 6 months. Because it's something that's so big picture, you're going to be looking at achieving that long-term. So like in our example, a balanced and productive future for all Native students. So you'll see that's really broad. I think we could all think of what we think that would entail in our various communities, but it's very broad, it's very long-term. Our mission is when we start getting down to something a bit more specific. So a mission is going to describe how your project is going to help to achieve that vision. So when we think about that piece, when we think about that mission, what are you doing? For whom? And how are you going to accomplish that vision? So like in our example here, we want to support our Native American students in successful academic achievement and to preserve and respect the whole person through culturally relevant activities. So you'll see we're not getting down into the nitty gritty. We're not listing every single service we're going to be providing to students, but we're definitely getting more specific about what we're going to do in order to achieve that vision. Now, like I said, if that's something that you'd like to work on developing a vision and mission statement for your program or for your organization, we have a tool we can share with you to help walk you through some additional steps to do that, as well as you can always reach out to the OIE TA team, and we're happy to provide some additional guidance in that area as well. But it's just a great way to be able to focus your team, particularly as then we head into these next steps of planning. So now we're going to move over to your goals and objectives. So when you wrote your grant proposal, you were asked to include project goals and objectives, including how you were going to address your Gepra measures, as well as those project-specific measures that you had that were specific to your project. So those objectives that were really unique to what you were proposing for your project. So as we reviewed all of your proposals, we saw a really wide range of goals and objectives. And today we want to delve a little deeper into exactly what we're talking about from the OIE perspective when we talk about goals and talk about objectives and how to make them really effective in the design and implementation of your project. So when we're talking about goals, we're talking, again, more long-term and broad. Some people will use their mission statement or sometimes even their vision statement as their goal. Some of you may have one goal. I've seen some proposals that had anywhere from 3 to 5 goals. Typically not many more than that though. So as we're working through and thinking about our goals and objectives, think about, do you have the right amount of goals? Do you know exactly which ones are your goals versus your objectives? Do you have too many or not enough? And then as we get down to your objectives, these are your specific activities or targets of your project. So the big chunks of your project, the big components. So for instance, some of you might be expanding. I know for many of the null projects, you might be expanding to new grade levels. So that would often be an objective that you're going to be adding on 7th and 8th grade to your program. Or for some of our ACE projects, maybe you're going to be adding on specific services that weren't originally available in your community or to your students. Maybe you're going to be developing certain programs. All of these different things that are the key components of your program should be objectives. Because all of these objectives, once accomplished, will show you how to achieve your goals. So they all build back up. And then outcomes are your results. That's what you're going to be reporting are your outcomes in your annual performance report. They'll show how you met your objectives or are on your way to meeting your objectives. And you'll report those outcomes both quantitatively and qualitatively on your annual performance report. So as we think about the Gepra measure, so we have our goals, you have your objectives that are specific to your project, But all of us also have to report on the Gepra measures unique to our grant program. So I do want to review what those are for our 3 programs that are on today. So if you are an ACE grantee, you have 8 Gepra measures that you're required to report on annually. So if you're trying to frantically write these down, remember they are in your notice inviting applications, as well as they'll be available in the slide deck and recording after this. And we've covered them a bit in some previous webinars as well. But remember that you will have to report on each and every one of these. So it's worth the time to start thinking about how you're going to report on each and every one of these. Then as we move over to the NULL program, the NULL program has 4 Gepra measures. If you're a Nullity D grantee, you are required to report again on all 4 of these measures every year. And then finally, as we move over to our STEP program, you'll see that there are 7 Gepra measures here. 2 of them are required for everyone. So capacity building activities by the TEA and capacity building activities by the SEA or LEA. Those are going to be required, as is education programs. So A, B, and C there, everybody is going to be reporting on those. The other 4, based on what I already know about your programs, you're all going to be reporting on teachers recruited or retained. You're all going to be reporting on work-based learning experience programs. Only one of you will be reporting on actions to open a charter school. So if you're not opening a charter school, you will not be reporting on that one. And we don't have any grantees who will be converting a school. So no one will be required to report on that one this year. So the STEP ones are just a little more complex in that 3 apply to everyone, and the others are dependent upon what types of services you're planning to provide. But remember, as you're looking at these Gepra measures, you'll report on them exactly as they're written. So we'll talk a little bit about how that's different from your project objectives. But with your Gepra measures, you'll report on each and every one of these exactly as they're written. So how does that kind of connect and flow? So the kind of general flow of these items that we've talked about and how they work together is that you have your vision and your mission. And like I said, some of you may have one or the other, which is fine. That feeds down into your programmatic goals, those big picture things that you plan to achieve by the end of your project. So for some of you at the end of 3 years, up to 5 years, depending upon your program. And then your objectives are those main program components. So for example, you'll see you may have multiple objectives that are going to help you achieve your goal. There may be just one objective for each goal. There may be 4 objectives for each goal. That's all completely fine, but it's all those objectives feeding back into those goals so that by the end of your project, you've achieved not only all of those objectives, all those components of your program, all those activities, but you've achieved all of those longer term goals. So I want to talk a bit more about your project objectives because, as we said, your Gepra measures are set. You don't really have a lot of option in that. You'll be using exactly as they are written for your specific grant program. But with your project objectives, you do have the ability to now, before your first reporting, not to change them, because whatever you wrote in your grant is what you are held to doing. Think of your proposal as your contract as to what you said you would do with those grant monies, but we do have the ability to, before this first reporting, make sure that our project objectives are, as we talked about just a bit, SMART. The reasoning for that is really taking your project objectives and making sure that they're going to be easy to report on and that they're going to answer all of the questions that need to be answered for your reporting. So as we think about what that means, SMART's an acronym. It stands for specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-based. And sometimes you'll see slightly different versions of SMART. Sometimes instead of time-based, it'll be time-bound. Instead of attainable, it'll be achievable. It's all exactly the same. So even if you've worked with SMART goals before and you're thinking the acronym stood for something slightly different, you were doing the exact same thing, I promise. So when we think about all of these pieces, it doesn't mean that those will be all different chunks. I like to think of it as a checklist for my goals. And it really makes sure that I'm putting out high quality goals and objectives that have a clear aim and purpose and are going to be able to demonstrate the impact of my project. So let's go through and learn a bit more about this and how it can work and why it might be beneficial to take that time. So we talked before about why it's important. Some of the goals that we've seen, some of the objectives that we've seen in the proposals might have had some of the parts of being SMART, but it might not have had all the parts of being SMART. And some of the benefit of that is that if we make sure that our goals are SMART, then it's going to help ensure that we're reporting on everything we need to be reporting about. It's going to make sure that we are painting a clear picture of our program and providing all the information needed to really show the great things that you're doing, the great outcomes that you have, and that we're using our money appropriately, effectively, so that we can easily move into our next continuation year. So let's break apart that SMART piece. So first up is specific. So when we talk about our goals being specific and we're talking about our goals and objectives, we want it to be detailed and focused and talk about exactly what is to be achieved. So I've got two examples here that we'll take through the whole SMART acronym and kind of break them apart. So as we're looking at this piece, if your goal is specific, you'll know because anybody is going to be able to pick up that objective, read it, understand it, and know exactly what you're talking about. The other thing I like to bring up under specific is that ideally, your objectives will be one sentence, not one really long run-on sentence, and not one paragraph. It's sometimes really easy to get caught up in all the details, but we want to make this specific and succinct. So it's a great aim to make these objectives one sentence. Now you'll notice in our example, so the first one, a native language proficiency assessment that measures oral reading and writing language skills for grades K-4 will be developed by August 30th, 2021. So in this particular objective, I'm saying that by the end of my first year of my project that I'm going to develop this assessment. You'll see the part in green is where really making sure it's specific as to what's being developed and for whom. That's a big piece. You can see that also in the second one. By October 21st, at least 75% of K-4 students who participate for both years of the language project. So think about this in the context of your project and really being specific about who are you trying to impact with that particular objective. So if you're talking about a particular part of your program, what students do you actually expect to participate in that particular piece? Are there any parameters that need to be denoted so that it's really clear exactly what you were planning to do? The other one to point out there is you'll notice the participate for both years of the language project, or maybe for your ACE program, you might think about, that they're going to participate in at least 50% or 75% of the activity hours for the services that they've selected. Because if you're trying to show, say, an increase in academic achievement, and you have a student who signed up for a service, but then only attended it 1 or 2 times, you're probably not going to see that level of academic achievement from them because they didn't really partake in the entire service that you offered to them. Whereas if you have a student who came to the majority of that service, if they came to 75% of the classes that were offered on that particular activity, then we would expect to see more impact from that particular activity. So think through those things when you're thinking through specific nature. Then we'll talk about being measurable. This is super, super important, particularly when it comes to then being able to do your reporting. It needs to be an objective that is quantifiable, because you are required to report both quantitative data and qualitative data. So if you can't put a number on it, it's going to be extremely challenging to report. So think about, what would success look like for that particular component? What data will you need to collect in order to report? So what tool or metric are you going to use to measure this? And then how are you going to analyze it? So for example 1, it was just a matter of they were developing this particular assessment. So that's a pretty easy thing to find the metric for. You either have an assessment at the end or you don't have an assessment at the end. It's a yes or no. And so for things like that are more of a yes or no, you can report that as a 0 for no or a 1 for yes. Super simple reporting. For most of our objectives, though, it's going to be a little bit more complex than just a pure yes or no. So if we look at example 2, you can see that at least 75% of our K4 students are going to show progress. So we know it's quantifiable. When we look at that, we can see that we're looking for 75%. So then when you're reporting, you would be reporting on what percentage of your K4 students showed progress. Whether it be, okay, right now we're at 50% and we're working to get to our goal of 75, or maybe you overachieve, but it gives you exactly what you're going to be reporting. And it gives you the how of how you're going to be reporting. So you can see as we keep reading down, as measured by the project's native language proficiency pre and post project test. So it tells us exactly in the objective what tool we're going to use for measurement. So that's really important to think about as you're creating these objectives as well. Many of you included that information in your proposal, but not necessarily in the exact same sentence as you put what your actual goal number was for your objective. So as you're putting this together into one sentence objective, it's putting all of those pieces and parts that you may have described in great detail over multiple pages and condensing that down into this 1 sentence objective. The next piece is to think about attainability. So you'll notice when we think about attainability, is it achievable and achievable within the time frame that we've given? We want it to push us because we always want to be looking to do more and better for our students, but we also want it to be realistic. So if you're starting a brand new service and you're starting it in a school that has 200 students, to say that by the end of your first year, all 200 students are going to be participating in that particular activity might be a bit of a stretch. That might not be the most realistic and attainable goal. Now, it might be that your goal is that by the end of the project, all of the students or a large number of the students would have participated in that particular. So think about that both in regards to how many students, think of it in regards to your timing, and think of it in regards to any improvement. So if you're looking at academic achievement and you're wanting to improve students' mathematical academic achievement, if on average, the students who would be participating in this service are being targeted because they were scoring 50% or below on their math, be it standardized test, benchmark, whatever you're using, might not be the most realistic that within a few months, they're going to get up to 80% on that same assessment. It might be more realistic that they could get to that level within a whole program year, depending upon how much dosage you're providing to them. It might be more realistic that they could get to that within 2 years. So really just looking and making sure that you're setting those objectives with a time frame and with an outcome that it's going to be attainable. The other caveat here, though, being it must be in alignment with what you put in your proposal. So if you put in your proposal that you're going to serve 200 students, you can't now come back and say, we're only actually going to serve 50 students because you were awarded based on the idea that you were going to serve 200. This is merely looking at, as you set up your objectives, setting them up in a way to make them as attainable as possible within the confines of what you promised in your original grant proposal. All right. Now let's go to relevant. This one tends to be a bit easier. So with relevant, we just want to make sure that our objectives are connected to our vision, they're connected to our goals, all of these things align. So if our program is particularly focused on college and career readiness activities, if our program is particularly focused on STEM activities, that we're not all of a sudden trying to throw in an objective that's totally in a different area. But primarily, all of your goals and objectives in your proposals were very relevant and focused. So I don't think that one's going to be as much of an issue. And then the final, the T part of SMART is time-based. In all honesty, time tends to be the part that gets left out of SMART goals most commonly, because it's just easy to think, well, I already know when we're going to achieve that by, and then we forget to put it in our objective. So really make an effort to make sure that your objectives have a timeline for completion, because it's going to push you to action. And it really shows, again, back to that attainability piece, when we expect to fully achieve this particular goal. Because certain ones you expect to achieve by the end of this first year of your program, but other things you might not expect to fully achieve until the end of your program, by the end of that full grant period, 3 to 5 years down the road. And that's completely fine, but it's important to denote that when you're writing that objective. So let's look at what that looks like in our examples. So you could see for our example 1 that we expected in this project to have that assessment developed by the end of August. So basically by almost the end of our first year of our grant program. Now for our second example, they used by the end of the first year of their grant program. But you have to think back to that attainability. Is that really when we expect to have 75% of our kids showing progress? Or is that our ultimate goal, that we hope to work with them and by the end of 2 or 3 years, be able to reach that full 75%? So just thinking about that part. One tip on the time base that I think makes it easier to remember to put in, I like to do it similar to the way that it is in example 2. A lot of times I just put a clause on the front of my objectives and say, by whatever the deadline. So by October 2021, by the end of year 3 of my grant, whatever that is, comma, and then I put the whole rest of my sentence. And it's an easy way just for me personally to make sure that I'm getting that time in there. So you can write yours however you like. That's just something that happens to work well for me to make sure that I don't forget to put in that timepiece. So that takes us through the full SMART explanation. If you have questions, make sure to pop those over in the chat, and we're going to be getting to those momentarily. Then with writing SMART statements, just a couple of final reminders. Remember, our goal is one sentence. And sometimes you may write it out and realize it's really more than one sentence or it's really long. Then it's just time to go back and maybe fine tune a bit. Use action words. Those action words are what drive us to actually complete these and make them actionable with our team. And so I gave just a few examples of some that are pretty common in objectives. And then again, remember, just get that time frame in there. So I do see one question that's popped up. Can you speak to ACE grantees whose original grant proposal activities and ability to provide direct services had to change post-funding, with certain activities and strategies being disallowed post-award? Not all of the proposed objectives are still possible, so estimates of numbers served would shift too. So 2 pieces to that. One, yes, some of you will be modifying and changing, particularly those who are ACE grantees and are working on grant activities and planning right now. So you may see some of your objectives change as you're adapting some of your actual activities. However, the number of students served through your project would not change, as that was part of what your grant was awarded on. But if you do have specific questions about the exact numbers for certain activities or something like that, that would best be if you want to send me either a private message or an email to the OIE at seiservices.com. We can look at those specific ones to see what, if anything, could or would change on those. But in general, things like the number of students served, that's set because that was part of what your grant was awarded off of. Great question. All right, so we are going to do a little activity. So go back to your voting buttons. Remember, for some of you, it's one of 2 places. And it's because, unfortunately, Zoom updates things and sometimes they move. So it is either under participants, which is the button with the 2 little people and down at the end of your participant list. Or for some of you, it is at the bottom of your screen under your reactions button. One of the 2. If you can't find it either spot, don't fret too much. You can always put your answer in the chat box as well. Just using one of the voting buttons makes it a quick way to find the answers when I'm trying to look overall. But you can vote in any which way. So I'm going to give you an example SMART objective. And if you will just vote yes or no, is it SMART? So first one up, students who attend the XYZ program will improve their mathematical abilities. So you can vote in. Is it SMART? Is it not SMART? So far, we have an overwhelming majority for not SMART. So let's see. Correct. So it is relevant. It's very relevant, but it's missing the specificity, the measurability, the achievability, and time bound that would make it go all the way to SMART. All right, so we'll go to our next option. Let's see here. For this one, 73% of students who attend the XYZ program, at least 88% available program hours, and scored below proficiency on the beginning of year math benchmark will increase their mathematical abilities as follows. 3rd graders will increase in math fact fluency. 4th graders will increase in fraction, addition, and subtraction. 5th graders will increase in solving multi-step word problems. Increases will be measured at the individual student level using the end of year math benchmark scores. Ta-da! So is that smart or not smart? All right. We're a little more torn on this one. Right now, we're pretty tied between smart and not smart. So let's do our reveal. It's close, but not quite. So there's a couple of things that would make this a little challenging to be a SMART objective for us. It is not time bound. So yeah, as Michael put in the chat, it's SMART, but not quite to SMART. So we don't have an actual deadline for when we expect to achieve this particular goal, as well as the particular dilemma here too for reporting is that we have multiple things that we would be trying to report in just one objective. That's really, really challenging to do in the G5 reporting layout. So if we were going to do something like this, we would want to break it up into multiple objectives and give it that time-bound piece to both make it smart and to make it reportable within the system we have available. So close, but not quite. All right, let's try our next one. There we go. By the end of the program year, at least 70% of students who regularly attend at least 50% of program hours, the XYZ program will demonstrate increased mathematical abilities as measured by the beginning and end of year math benchmark tests. So go ahead and fast finger in your voting. Is this one smart or not smart? It looks like the majority of us are voting that this one's going to be smart. Let's see. And Helen brings up a good point. So yes, this one is technically smart, but Helen brings up a good point that how can it be smart? It doesn't say increase by how much. So this is something for you to think about as well when you're developing your objectives. So for this particular objective, they had set it where if there was any increase, so it was any incremental increase. If they had been scoring a 50 and they made a 51, they had increased their mathematical abilities, so that counted. For many of us, we might be looking for a much more specific level of improvement. So it might be that we want our students to go from maybe not passing their standardized test or their benchmark test to passing it. Or maybe it's just we're looking at grades. Maybe they've been not passing their math class and we would like to get them to where they're passing their math class. So if you want a specific increase, whether it be something like that from passing to not passing, or we want them to go up a minimum of 10%, then you would want to denote that in your objective. If you're just looking for any incremental improvement, then you can say, okay, we want any demonstrated increase, and that would be fine as well, just depending upon what it is that you're trying to achieve. So that's going to be specific to your individual programs. So Spencer was asking, don't we have to state how much they'll increase by as part of the goal? So kind of the same thing that Helen was getting at. Again, that's going to depend on what you're looking to achieve in your particular project. So if you want them to increase by a certain percentage, then yes, you absolutely would want to include that in your objective. But if you're looking for any improvement, no matter how small in their achievement, then you could say just that. Any increase as shown on that test would count, and that's okay. It's just up to you as a team to decide, do we want literally any increase, or do we want to only count those who make a specific amount of progress for that particular objective? So it's going to be unique to each of your projects and what you're wanting to achieve with those individual objectives. And you might have one objective even that says any increase, and then you might have another one that says something about then we want maybe at 70% any increase, and 50% would increase by at least one grade level or by at least 15%. So you have those options. All right. Thank you for the questions. Those are great. Keep popping those in if you have any. All right. So I wanted to also show you one thing that has worked for me in creating SMART goals with my team before that may or may not be helpful for you and your team. So when showing my staff how to start creating their own SMART goals or SMART objectives, I found it helpful to provide them with a template so that they could kind of break it out as they were getting used to what all needed to be included. So what I used was time, who, what, and measurement. So as I'm thinking about that, it was looking at the time-bound piece. Like I said, I always find it easiest to kind of pop it there on the front. Who am I trying to impact? What am I going to be doing with them? And how am I going to measure it? So let me show you how that would work. So by the end of the program year is my time. And you see we're breaking down that same goal we had before. Who am I working with? So I'm working with at least 70% of my students who regularly attend the program. Notice I denoted what regularly means. What do I want them to be doing? Well, I want them to increase their mathematical abilities. And how am I going to measure that? I'm going to use my beginning and end of year math benchmark tests. And as you think about those measurements, think about tools that you're going to have available to you easily. So, sometimes we automatically start thinking towards state standardized tests, but we often don't have that data easily accessible in a timely manner. So don't feel like you're always pinned into using that as your measurement. You can think about what tools and what measurements actually will work well for you and be available to you. You can get the data. So that's just a little template, like I said, that I've used with my groups before that's been helpful, because I just love a good template when I'm trying to break down a new piece. So like I said, feel free to use it or not use it, but it is there for you. So now I want to talk a bit more about our planner. So as we think about doing all of this piece of looking at our goals and our objectives, making sure our objectives are SMART and getting ready for reporting, we have developed a tool that is available for you. It is an optional tool, but we're going to encourage everyone to use it at least as much as possible and provide you with some resources to be able to do that. And it's a project planner. So I'm going to show you a couple of pieces of it here and walk through some of the information that'll be in there. So part of that tool is a goals and objectives planner, where you can actually pop in the goals for your particular project, however many there might be, and pop in your existing objectives, and then work to take those existing objectives and make them SMART. Working with your team, we have this planner in Google Docs to make it really easy for you to be able to collaborate with your team. You can, of course, then download it and use it in Excel or anything else if that's easier. But what's really worked well for us when using this with grantees in the past is to use the Google Docs, because then the whole team can get in there and work collaboratively. And because you also have the ability with that to set people where they can see it and maybe provide you with some comments, but they can't change anything. And then those members of your team that you want to be able to actually make changes and edits right there in the actual document. So you'll see you're going to be able to pop all of that in there, do that planning around making them SMART. And then you'll see this next part talks about milestones. So we have the milestones in there to help you think about those intermediate benchmarks, because most of the time your objectives are going to be things that you expect to achieve either by the end of each grant year or by the end of your entire grant project. And so these milestones are those intermediate things that you expect to achieve to help you get all the way to achieving that objective. So as you're thinking in particular about year one milestones, think about what will need to be done by the time you do your APR reporting and what will need to be done by the end of this first year of your grant, by September 30th, 2021. When you're thinking about that, keep in mind that on your annual performance report, we want to be able to highlight substantial progress. And that's kind of a key phrase that you'll hear a lot in regards to your reporting. Your reporting should always be showing that you're making substantial progress on your project, so that when your program officer is reviewing your reporting, they're able to see that progress as they're making those continuation determinations for the next year. So always using these to highlight that substantial progress. All right, so here you'd be able to pop in those milestones and even start putting in some dates for when you think that you would start on each of those pieces and parts, even what grant year. So if you're doing some longer term planning, maybe you know this is going to happen in year 2 or year 3, but you want to go ahead and pop it in. There's places for that. As you pop in your milestones, it will actually magically put it on the next page for you, where you can even break it down into tasks and assign those to different members of your team. One thing I like to do when I'm using this is I'll put in the task, and then for person responsible, not only will I put their name in there, but I'll tag them. And if you're using this in Google Docs, it will send them an email letting them know they've been tagged right there, so they can go in and see that a task has been assigned to them. And then you'll note in each of your planners, you've got this timeline going out for as many years as you have. So you'll have it going out 3 to 5 years, depending upon which project you have. When you put all of this information in, it'll actually create just a very simple Gantt chart. If you were on our distance learning session yesterday, Olani shared a little bit about Gantt charts there. This will actually create one for you just in a very kind of simplified format. If you have another way you're doing that, you wouldn't necessarily have to use this. Like I said, each part of this is what's going to be helpful and useful, but it will take those milestones and pop them over here for you. If you pop in those tasks, it can really help you to outline the steps to achieve your milestones, create that timeline of implementation, and give you the ability to assign things out to your team so that you're not having to be responsible for literally everything. So as we look back over there, those milestones will pop in automatically if you populate them on your goal and objective tool, and then you can pop in your tasks and denote those out. So as we think about then kind of timing that out, and we talked about timing your milestones, thinking about what you'll have achieved by the time you're doing your annual performance reporting, and then what you will have achieved by the end of your full first grant year. It's helpful to know when your annual performance reporting is. So if you are an ACE grantee or a Knowledge D grantee, yours will be the same. You're both going to have your first annual performance report due on May 3rd, 2021. You're going to be reporting your data all the way through the end of March. So you'll be reporting your information from October 1st of 2020, which was the first day of your grant year, through March 31st of 2021. And we'll be doing some APR webinars for each of your specific grant programs to show you exactly how you'll do that in G5. And I know some of you are already familiar with G5. For some of you, you have not gotten to know G5 yet, but we'll go through all of that in your APR webinar, how exactly to input that information. But as you're thinking about what you're going to be reporting, know that you're going to be reporting from 10/1/2020 to 3/31/2021. If you're a STEP grantee, yours is a little bit different. Your first annual performance report will be due May 28th, 2021. And you're going to be reporting on data from October 1st, 2020 to May 28th, 2021. So you have a little bit longer reporting period and your due date is a little later. It's the end of May, May 28th. All right. And I know there was a question about both the presentation slides and the planner. So we'll be sending out the presentation recording and slides tomorrow. The planners we'll be sharing with you today. We did not want to email those out prior to the webinar and everyone wonder what in the world this was. So now that you know what it is and to expect it, those will be emailed out later today. All right, so as we think about that planner, I'm actually going to switch over and show you exactly what your planner will look like when you get it. So I'm going to switch what I'm sharing with you here. And I'm going to go over to your planner. All right, so there are different planners for the different programs because each of you do have some different things. So I'm going to show you all three, just a brief overview and what you have in common. So all of the planners are set up as an Excel workbook. The first tab in all of the workbooks is a menu showing all the different tools that are available to you in your planner. And these are all links. So if I go to any of them, let's say I want to go to my project overview, I can then click there and it will take me there. So it's also just a nice way that if you want to automatically go somewhere within that workbook, you don't have to go thumb through all the tabs at the bottom. If you go to the front to the menu, you can click on any of them and it will take you straight away over to that tab. Everyone's second tab is a project overview. This information here is just a nice snapshot of everything about your program. So all of these are set up fairly similar. They're going to be a little bit different depending upon your grant program, but in general, they've got the same information. If it is this kind of weird baby green color, that means that you're going to enter that information here on this page. If it is not, okay, then you're going to actually have that information pop over here. So that means that as you're working in other areas of the workbook, it'll automatically fill in that information for you. So you don't have to worry about entering it. Now you're welcome to still just type it in. It won't hurt anything. But if you don't want to, all of it will pre-fill as you do other things within the workbook. The next tab is, again, the same for everybody. That's your goals and objectives that we just looked at, where you can pop in your goals, pop in your existing objectives and work on making them smart, set up any of those milestones that you might want, anything like that. And just so you see, if I write a milestone here, the next tab is also the same for everyone, the task timeline. And notice that when I wrote in my milestone, it magically pops over here. So as much as possible, I tried to make it to where that stuff is automated so that you're not having to retype anything that could just be pulled from somewhere else. Again, you can always just type it in. It won't hurt anything, but it will allow you to do it that way. The next tab is also going to be the same for everyone, other than the fact that your Gepra will be different. So you'll see your Gepra already pre-filled in for you. And then as you develop your objectives, those will come over. So you'll see you don't have to type those in. If you create them over here on your goal and objective tool, they'll pop over to your data collection. This tool is meant to help you plan out data collection for your reporting. So as you're using this, you can then think through, okay, for my Gepra, if I'm looking at the total number of options from which participating students can choose, how am I going to measure that? Who's going to be responsible for that? If it's something that is going to be reporting on a specific group of students, you can denote that. And you can also put in the time frame. So the things that I like to denote in the time frame type thing is like when we talked earlier about looking at testing data, that I know that I need to give an assessment, or I know that I need to pull data down on a certain date in order to have it in time for reporting. If you fill in all these time frames, it really makes a nice list of deadlines that you can pop right into your calendar. Okay, so that's what this data collection piece is for. For ACE grantees, you have an area to work on your service selection process, your family feedback. Those are unique to the ACE grantee workbook. In everyone's workbooks, you have the partnerships area to be able to denote your partners, those that you have MOUs in place with. This will come in handy as you're doing your report in section C, because you are required to report on the status of all of your partnerships, whether any partnerships have ended, any new ones have begun. So you'll be able to pull that information directly from here. The staffing tab is in everyone's planners. So again, being able to denote the staff who are working on your particular program. That's another piece that if there are changes in your key personnel have to be reported in section C of your reporting. So you'd be able to pull that information from here. All of the workbooks also have a professional development tab. Now you'll notice on the ACE workbook only, there is a note, and there's notes throughout these workbooks with helpful tips. But for instance, the helpful tip for professional development for ACE grantees is that remember, professional development can only be used for administrative staff and has to be part of your 20% project cost area. It cannot be provided for your direct service staff or for any contractors because that's considered building their capacity. So that's a note that you'll see in an ACE workbook that would not be in your NOL or STEP workbooks because those grants can use their grant funds for professional development. So check that out. That's something that's a little bit different, but you all have this tool. You all have a tool for sustainability planning, and we're actually going to be talking more about that later in the year. The budget area, and I'm going to go back to the menu to show you this. The budget area is a little bit different in each type of planner. So a little bit different for NOL versus ACE versus STEP. So the budgeting area for our ACE grantees, you have your per student cost and then your yearly breakdown, including your planning and implementation budgets, just like you set up when you created your budget revisions. And this way you can keep it all in one spot. If you need to do future revisions, you can just duplicate that tab, make your changes and send that in. So all of them will be a little bit different because for other projects, you don't have a per student cost. You might have fewer years. So all of your budget areas are set up basically the same, but unique to how your budgets are set up. Now, all of you will have a drawdown tab. This is particularly helpful when, again, you're going to be reporting in section B on drawdowns. So this is where you can keep track of that information, whether you're getting it from directly in G5 because you have view only access, or whether you're getting it from your fiscal staff. But you can put that information in. It will calculate your running balance for you. And again, that's really helpful when you're reporting in section B on your budget. Everybody has a budget tracking area. And then I really want to get into this Gepra section. So all of you have this, again, specific to the Gepra for your program. It's been pre-filled. These are set up exactly like you will report them in G5. You are able to then get all of your information ready, both quantitative and qualitative, right here in the workbook. And then you can just cut and paste it into G5. Here are a couple of reasons that's particularly helpful if you're not as familiar with G5. G5 can be a little finicky on a good day. It has a tendency to time out. Even when you're actively typing in it, it has a tendency to time out because it measures on the timeouts between when you're hitting save, not between when you're actually actively typing. Okay, so when you're thinking about that, you might think, oh, okay, well, it'll warn me. No, it will not warn you. It will just time out. And it can be really frustrating because you've been in there working, you've been entering your data, you've been putting in your qualitative data, all that narrative, and then it times out and it's all gone. So this can really help with that because you can plan all of that out here, put all of your information in, all your quantitative, put all of your narrative here. This box will expand as you type in it, so you can plan out all your narrative. And then when you go into G5, just copy, paste, hit save, and it won't time out on you because there's no way you copying and pasting will take so long for it to time out. So it keeps that timing out from happening. And if for some reason you were to get timed out or you were to get disconnected, you're not losing all your hard work. You just go copy and paste it still because it's all right here. The secondary part about the reporting piece that this is helpful for is that each year you're expected to talk about your continued progress. This way you're not having to go back and pull previous APRs to be able to see that information. It's actually right here for you. You know what you already wrote in your narrative, you know what you already wrote for quantitative reporting, and each year you can just build upon that information without having to pull out those old APRs. And then in your final year, you're expected to report on every year of data. So again, all of it is already going to be here and you're not going to have to go back and pull all of that up. It's also really helpful if you have turnover in staff that they're not having to go back and pull all of that information. It'll all be stored there in one convenient spot. So that's set up for all of your various Gepra, as well as the same setup for your project specific objectives. So that's one particularly helpful feature, especially as we think about doing our reporting. And I do see we have a couple of reporting questions that I'm going to get to momentarily. Didn't want you to think I forgot about it. Then all of you do have this tab for reporting reminders. Just gives you some helpful reminders about the APR to review. And then the final section is the same idea of giving you areas to write out your executive summary, your section B and your section C narrative, to where again, you can either copy and paste those or put them into an uploadable form from there, as well as the optional budget reporting form. And so all of it is again in one location and has that information for the duration of your grant. You'll see as we go over for ACE grantees, that goes through all 5 years. So it keeps everything in just one project planner, everything about your grant. So to show a little bit of the difference, when I go over to my null project planner, you'll see that one of the things that's different here in my planning section is that I have a primary grant activities section to be able to denote those primary things that I'm doing as part of my project. So for null, that might be creating a native language assessment, creating a 3rd grade curriculum, hiring 2 new teachers, whatever those particular grant activities might be that you're going to be providing. The other thing that's a little bit different in the null one, you'll see in the budgeting area, because it's a 3-year grant project, you've got your 3 years of budgets there. And the reporting is set up around your 4 Gepra. For the step planner, You're set up pretty similarly to the null piece, except that you have the primary grant activities, the 3-year budget, and your 7 potential Gepra. The other piece I didn't point out in the null is that you also have sections for curriculum, because almost all the null grantees are developing curriculum, and you'll want to be reporting on that as well. There's a place to track all the curriculum development as well as any assessment development. So there's tools and things in there for each of those. The other nice thing about this is your planner. So as you're going through, if you want to include another tool in there, if you want to include some data in there, you just add a tab for it and include anything you want. You're not limited to what you just see already provided in there. These are just the tools that we've found beneficial with grantees previously and think would be helpful, but you can add and change as much as you would like. All right. So I'm going to flip back over. And address just a couple of the questions here in particular. So I saw the video recordings. Yes. So this particular one, as well as others, are available on YouTube, as well as we'll send out those links again via email. And then they are in the process of being also updated on OIE's webpage. So we'll let you know when that's up as well. There's a question about planning year. So yes, you are still required to submit an annual performance report in your planning year. There are going to be some things, some of your objectives that exist that you're not addressing yet because you're not in implementation, and that's okay. You'll still report on them and just denote that. And when we do your APR webinar, we'll kind of get into that a bit more as well. And I'm seeing, yes, the same question as far as planning. So yes, again, you will still be reporting, you will still be doing an APR, and during your APR webinar, we'll get a little bit more into how you can denote those objectives that you haven't gotten to yet because you haven't started implementing yet, and that is okay. And then as we look down, will completing this form make it easy to complete the report and enter info into G5? Yes. Very much so. And in just a minute, I'm going to see if one of our previous grantees that has used this planner will be able to unmute and just give you their thoughts on how this helped them be able to use this in G5. All right. Yes. Are these worksheets protected, or will we be able to make modifications? No, these worksheets are not protected. So you will be able to make modifications. So that's why I say there are things that have the formulas put in there to try to make it easier for you, but they are not protected. So if you type over them, that's fine. You're able to do that. So you're able to make any modifications you want to this. Is it required? No, it is not required. It's encouraged, but not required. Also remember that, as you saw, there's a multitude of tools available in there. You may find that in coordination with things that you already use, you may want to use bits and pieces of this, but you may have things, you know, like I know you're using Microsoft Projects, you probably already have things like the Gantt chart, task management, but you may not have the pieces that help you with the G5 reporting. So you may want to use those parts of the planner and then continue using Microsoft Project for your task management. It's up to you what works best for your team. And yes, I'm going to be sending out the workbooks after the webinar. I was just concerned if I sent it out before the webinar, it'd be a little confusing what in the world I was sending to you. All right. Now I'm going to see. I'm going to give you one bit more of information and then see if we can get your fellow grantee unmuted to be able to share. All right, so the other thing I've seen in a couple of private messages as well is that this looks great and impressive, but it is a lot of information. So don't worry, you're not just being thrown out there. Here's this big project planner and all this new reporting. Good luck. We are here to support you, particularly as being new grants this year. We want to make sure that everybody has the assistance and support and help that they need. So we are providing for each new grantee, kind of as a kickoff piece, a custom coaching session with your team. Now, this can be with just your project director. It can be with your entire project team. I really encourage you to include your entire team. I think it makes it a more productive time. But you're going to be able to schedule that around your availability. You'll do that at the link you see on the screen and that I'm also posting here in the box. These times are first come, first serve. So I would encourage you, if you know your availability, go ahead and get on that link and get yourself scheduled. During this time, we're going to be able to really talk about your project goals and objectives, prepare for annual performance reporting, answer any of your questions, and just make sure that you're able to get started on the right foot, that your annual performance report is complete and correct, and that you don't have any questions as you head into that reporting season. So like I said, you can grab it off the screen, you can grab it out of the chat box, and go ahead and self-select a time and date that are going to work well for you. All right. Now, as we're doing that, the other piece to the coaching is if you have time to do just a little bit of pre-work, just a little bit before your coaching session, it will make the coaching session a lot more productive. So the only thing that I would ask you give a whirl is if you are able to go into your planner and pop in your existing goals and objectives. Okay, so that's just going to that third tab with your goals and objectives and popping in your existing goals and objectives from your proposal. That is not required before your coaching session, but like I said, it will make the time just a little more productive because we'll be able to look right immediately. You're welcome and encouraged that if you have time to start thinking about making those smart and working on that, go for it. But just at minimum, if you are able to just take a few minutes to pop in your existing goals and objectives, that would be super, super helpful in preparation for the coaching session. All right. Now, I know we went through a lot of information, so I do want to make sure that I got to all your questions. I was thumbing back through the chat box to make sure if there were any I missed. And if I did accidentally skip your question, please pop that back in the chat box so I can make sure to get to it. I want to make sure that everybody gets their questions answered. And yes, Clarence, great question. So there is another session similar to this for continuing grantees. So if you also have an NYCP grant, if you have an old NOLAD grant that is continuing, or an old STEP grant that is continuing, then yes, we do have a session for those continuing grantees that is starting at 3 Eastern. We'll cover similar information, but a little bit different because for them, they're not starting from scratch. They're already midway through their projects, some of them nearing the end of their projects. So if you are involved with an NYCP or an old Knowledge ED or an old STEP grant that are continuing, then we encourage you to join us for that second session starting at 3 Eastern. As far as what dates are available for the coaching sessions, we have a multitude of dates and times available. If you click on that link, and Alani has popped it back in the chat box for us, if you click on that link, you'll be able to see all the different dates and times that are available. There's a lot of different options. And yes, if you had some ACE team members that were confused about the time, I apologize. They are welcome to, this will be recorded. I'll send out that recording tomorrow. Or if they want to tune into the next one, like I said, the information is a little bit different. So honestly, it may be a little confusing for them. They're welcome to tune in, but they may be better off just watching the recording and then following up with me with any questions they have. All right. Well, keep popping any questions in, and thank you, Rashonda. I'm going to pop up our typical poll for the end of our time together. If you don't mind fast fingering in your answers, we would greatly appreciate it. As you're doing that, I am going to just give you a couple of reminders about other upcoming events. So just a reminder that we do have our project director meeting coming up in April from the 20th to 22nd. You should have received a save the date for that. It will be each afternoon, Tuesday through Thursday from 1 to 6:15 Eastern. Don't worry, there are some little stretch breaks popped in there. We have some really great sessions and speakers coming. So we look forward to seeing you in April for that. But more immediate are some things that we have coming up here. So I talked about we were going to do annual performance reporting webinars for each of you, specific to your actual grant programs. So if you are an ACE grantee, you are going to be on March 8th at 4:30. And that's Eastern time. And the invite for that will go out with your planner today. If you are a null at ED grantee, you're going to be on March 8th, but at 1 Eastern. And if you're a STEP grantee, because of your later reporting date, you will be actually April 28th at 2 Eastern. I also want to remind you about our distance learning series. We will be continuing that. In March, we have audio and video recording coming up on March 9th. And then virtual assessment coming up on March 23rd. So we'll be reminding everyone about that. We have a link where you can sign up for the whole series and just get those calendar reminders. And then also tomorrow, 2 events. One in particular for everyone is our office hours. That is that casual come and go event where you can stop by, ask any questions you might have. That's from 1 to 2 Eastern. And then if you are a null grantee, this is just specific for our null grantees. We do have our talking circle tomorrow. So I look forward to seeing all of our null grantees on the talking circle tomorrow. All right, so as we wrap, I am going to ask, we have one of our grantees who is a continuing grantee and has used the project planner before. So for those of you who are wondering, how helpful would this be for reporting? How helpful would it be in general? I'm going to ask Brandon Locke from Anchorage to share how he's been able to use the planner for his program.
Yeah, hi Sarah, and sorry I had to step away for a moment. I will tell you, for those of you that are brand new to this, it probably is a little bit daunting and overwhelming, but I will tell you, Sarah is amazing with technology, and the planner that she's put together, I used religiously for the last 3 years, and was hoping that we would have another planner for the continuation grant, or the should say the second grant that we have. It's really helpful because it's basically your one-stop shopping spreadsheet, where you've got all of the items that we need to report on regularly, but it's also a great way of being able to share with your team members and folks that you work with, so that they can see the progress. And it's not just about the data collection, but it's really about everything, the resources. I mean, everything really. Is that is
Yeah,
that what you were looking for, Sarah? Or
that is perfect. Yeah. Just a word from someone who's actually used the planner before, other than me from the TA team saying it would be
yeah,
helpful. So yeah,
no,
thank you.
it is very, very helpful, and it takes a little bit of getting used to. I'm not a big, huge Google spreadsheet person, but I have learned a lot, and it's really a great tool. So thank you, Sarah.
Yeah, thanks, Brandon. And there's a question about sending out the invite again for the distance learning series. Yeah, I can go ahead and pop that in when I send out the recording. I'll send out the registration link for the distance learning series as well. No problem. All right, well, we're nearing our end of our time together today. We're going to pop over in the chat box the link for our official feedback survey. If you haven't done one before, you might want to check it out. They're so much fun. They only take 3 minutes. You're able to provide feedback on today's event, give us ideas for future events, and it's super, super, super helpful for our OIETA team. So if you don't mind taking just a moment to go ahead and complete that, we would greatly appreciate it. I've also popped up all of the contact information for all of your program officers, as well as for our OIETA team. You can always reach out to us at oie@seiservices.com. Remember to get your coaching sessions scheduled. Those are first come, first serve. So I know you'll want dibs on the day and time that work best for you. And then I'll be following up later this afternoon with the planner link, and I'll include the link to those distance learning sessions as well. And then tomorrow, you'll get the recording of this event as well as the slide deck. So you can also then share it with your team. And if you or they have any questions in the meantime, feel free to reach out to us at the email address or join us tomorrow for office hours and get your question answered then. So thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time.